Oh, do come in. Welcome to Planet America. Hi, I'm John Barrett.
I'm Chester Tadello.
What a week. 6 states voting for the Democratic presidential nominee as Donald Trump faces a moment of truth over the coronavirus.
We're going to be getting the latest results and ask a former Trump aide who the president really wants to face, Bernie or Biden. But first...
What an extraordinary ride it has been of late for Joe Biden. A month ago, his lead in national polls collapsed. A fourth-place finish in Iowa saw him fall behind Bernie Sanders for the first time. Within days, Joe Biden's political obituaries were being prepared. Then he came fifth in New Hampshire. By mid-February, Mike Bloomberg was surging, but then polls picked up what became the Biden comeback in South Carolina on the 29th of the month. That propelled the former VP into Super Tuesday last week, and now Joe Biden has taken off like a skyrocket. After trailing Sanders by 10 points, he's leading nationally by almost 20 points. Helping to fuel all of that, the decision by Buttigieg, Klobuchar and Bloomberg to suspend their campaigns and endorse Joe Biden. And the Joe-mentum continued this week, with another former rival, Kamala Harris, announcing her endorsement.
One of the things that we need right now is we need a leader who really does care about the people and who can therefore unify the people. And I believe Joe can do that.
Also hitting the campaign trail for Biden in Michigan this week, Senator Cory Booker.
It's about time we start unifying as a party and begin the work to beat Donald Trump.
But Bernie also pulled out a very big political gun. Civil rights leader and former presidential candidate Jesse Jackson.
Keep hope alive. Bernie Sanders can win, will win, must win. Bernie can win, will win, must win. When Bernie wins, healthcare wins. Love you guys.
But the Biden bounce is also showing up in head-to-head polls with President Trump. Biden leading by 10 in a poll from CNN this week and 11 in Quinnipiac's latest. Sanders is also in a strong position, though, against Trump.
Although not quite as strong as Biden. Out of the 15 battleground states, they're the states that had less than an 8-point margin in 2016, Biden leads Trump by 6 points, whereas Sanders only leads Trump by 3. And one more piece of good news for Biden, in that Quinnipiac poll that you mentioned before, they asked about leaders' character traits, including the big one for elections, whether the person cares about people like me. And only 43% said that Trump cared about people like them, but 59% said Biden did. And that result could be even more handy if hundreds of people start dying from coronavirus.
Yeah, indeed. Now, of course, we learned in 2016 that national popular vote polls aren't a great indicator when it comes to the Electoral College, the process that decides the presidency. Still, here is potentially a pretty important point. Heading into that last election, Hillary Clinton was averaging just under 47% against Trump. Biden now averages over 50%. But here may be the even more important point. Even though Biden is doing better than Clinton, 2020 Trump is doing better than 2016 Trump. He's half a point ahead of where he was when he won the Electoral College last time. Now, the difference may be the lack of a strong Libertarian or Greens candidate, but who knows what Tulsi Gabbard is planning right now?
Well, I for one have no idea what she's playing at, but I sometimes wonder if Joe Biden even knows what Joe Biden is playing at.
If you agree with me, go to Joe 30330 and help me in this fight.
Huh? Look, there's been a lot of talk this week about Biden's brain fades, even as he creates all new ones.
A lifelong Democrat, a proud Democrat, an Obama Democrat.
And a Biden-Obama Democrat. But Biden has his share of defenders as well, like this journalist with a stutter who insists that some of Biden's so-called memory lapses are actually examples of Biden controlling his lifelong stutter. The journalist gave the example of Biden briefly struggling with the word Obama before using the phrase "my boss" instead. Well, here's the moment. You judge for yourself.
Saying that it was President, my boss, is his fault.
As someone who is also a recovering stutterer, I have to say that didn't look like stutter avoidance to me, but Who knows? I can't read Biden's mind. Either way, people are going on about this because 20 to 25% of people over 65 have mild cognitive impairment and 10% have dementia. Note, by the way, that there are more than two options here. It's not just Biden is perfect or Biden is senile. He might simply have mild cognitive impairment and not be as verbally nimble as he used to be. That is a bummer if you're running for president, but doesn't mean your judgment is impaired. In fact, one psychologist says that Biden's degeneration might not even go that far, saying Biden digresses and is tangential, and that's not necessarily cognitive decline. Biden could have always been like that. I'd also warn of the dangers of diagnosing from afar, except this very same psychologist then immediately pinged Trump instead for cognitive decline, saying that Trump doesn't even seem to have comprehension of reality, and that's what decline looks like. You know what? Why don't they all get tested? They're old. Unfortunately, the campaigns are too busy scoring cheap points, like this from the president's social media guy.
Turn this primary from a campaign that's about negative attacks into one about what we're for, because we cannot get re-elected. We cannot win this re-election. Excuse me, we can only re-elect Donald Trump.
Senile old Biden just told you to vote for Trump. Except, this is a bit of extra context for you.
Who run a progressive, positive campaign and turn this primary from a campaign that's about negative attacks into one about what we're for, because we cannot get re-elected. We cannot win this re-election. Excuse me, we can only re-elect Donald Trump if, in fact, we get engaged in this circular firing squad.
So it turned out Joe Biden stumbled on his words as per usual, but he didn't say something senile. The full sentence made sense. My question is, if Biden is so obviously incompetent and ready for the home, why do Trump's team have to make up examples? Why can't they just let Biden's real clips do the talking? This clip even got called out by Twitter for being misleading. Do you realise how hard you have to work to get called out by Twitter for spreading garbage? That's Twitter's entire business model.
Yeah, look, I'm no doctor either, Chaz, obviously, but if Joe Biden's problem really is dementia, he may have already had it when he last ran for president in 2008.
A man who will be the next president of the United States, Barack America.
In fact, he may have already had it when he first ran for president in the 1980s at the age of 44.
The only one thing he knew how to do was the one thing that is now being the currency of which is in fact being devalued so much.
What indeed, and watch this space because this week it's dementia. But remember the whole Hillary is dying thing from 4 years ago because she had a cough that wouldn't go away? Well, we're almost certain to get a coronavirus-inspired sequel to that. Meanwhile, Mike Bloomberg released his first post-campaign ad this week as a part of his pledge to spend whatever it takes to beat Donald Trump.
Not gonna happen.
They know they can't win the 2020 election.
You know what?
We're not going anywhere.
We will haunt your dream. We are.
Looks like Bloomberg's got the whole of Hollywood on side. I hope that leaves Bloomberg time to indulge in some of his more unorthodox extracurricular activities.
Let's go, oh! Let's go, oh! Let's go, oh! Let's go, oh! Let's go, oh!
Things I do for this university.
So now to Super-ish Tuesday, and this was the prediction this morning from America's pundit-in-chief.
Going to be a bad day for Crazy Bernie.
And true enough, it was bad for Bernie. First into Biden's column, Mississippi, a huge win with Sanders barely able to get any delegates at all.
And no surprise, John, to find that out of the 69% of voters who are black, Biden won 87% of them. That is the Sanders nightmare coming to fruition. That was only 3% fewer black voters than Obama won in 2008. Although, to be fair, Biden did win 70% of the white voters as well. Mississippi just loves them some Biden.
Yeah, then to Missouri, and it was a little bit closer, but look, again, an easy win for Joe Biden. Michigan was Bernie's comeback state in 2016 when he came from 25 points down to stage a shock win over Hillary Clinton, but not this time, Chaz.
Yeah, I want to focus a bit on Michigan because this is where Sanders put all his effort in this time round. This is one of those three critical Rust Belt states, along with Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, that the Democrats need to win back from Trump. And the whole point of Sanders' candidacy is he can win them by turning out new voters, young voters, and working class white voters. Well, let's have a look. 17% of the voters were first-time voters, which isn't fantastic, but not terrible either. And Sanders did win them 50 to 44%, so he did okay there. The 18 to 29s, a little more disappointing for Sanders. He did win them by 76 to 19%, as per usual, but once again, they just didn't turn out for him. Only 16% of the vote was 18 to 29s. In 2016, it was 19%. And finally, the big one, white people without a degree. This was how Sanders beat Clinton in 2016, and it's how Clinton lost the election to Trump. Well, Biden beat Sanders amongst these voters 49 to 39%. So you'd have to say Biden beat Sanders at his own game. It's hard for Bernie to come up with an effective reply to that.
Yes, so far he hasn't. Bernie's fading hopes then relied on another strong showing out west. He was able to salvage a bit in California last week. Idaho, though, not looking good. Called for Joe Biden. North Dakota gave a glimmer of good news for Bernie. The toughest, though, to pick, Washington State, among the hardest hit by US regions from the coronavirus with very little in-person voting. They have a mail-in balloting system. Local officials even asked voters not to lick the envelope when they sent their ballots back in. They helpfully suggested using a moistened sponge instead. Well, moistened ballots or not, these are the latest numbers. Very, very tight. All the early votes that have come through have seen about 30% go to candidates that have already dropped out. And ironically, that could potentially save Bernie from a big defeat because Biden didn't pick up those moderate votes. But it will see Washington delegates fairly evenly split, meaning Bernie has not made up for any lost ground today.
And all that mailing of votes that you mentioned suggests that Biden actually did better there than it seems, because much of that voting was done when Biden was struggling. In fact, if we look at those who made up their mind before March, Sanders won those voters 40 to 21%. But for those who made up their minds after March began, Biden won 55 to 19%.
And then both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders cancelled their election night rallies, both scheduled for Cleveland, Ohio, because of fears over the coronavirus. And then the DNC announced that Sunday's debate in Arizona would be held without an audience at the request of the candidates. Then Bernie Sanders flew to Vermont to rest, his campaign said. Maybe there's more to it. Remarkably, though, he did not give an election night speech at all. A very measured, even subdued Joe Biden did, and he began to pivot into general election mode.
We need American leadership. We need presidential leadership that's honest.
So, with the counting continuing, here is the latest delegate tally. Far from overwhelming, but it is an uphill battle for Bernie.
And don't forget, Sanders has gone on the record saying even if Biden doesn't win the majority, if Sanders doesn't win more delegates than Biden, he will give up.
If Biden walks into the convention or at the end of the process has more votes than me, he's the winner.
And that's true whether or not he has a majority or just a plurality.
Absolutely.
Good on him for sticking to that, but it does mean that what was already a tough ask for Sanders just became that little bit tougher.
Of course, the dust is still settling on today's result, but it could be that this Democratic primary is still far from over. Certainly if 2016 is any guide, Bernie Sanders is not one to throw in the towel lightly, even if he falls quite a long way behind in the delegate count. So, what do supporters of President Trump make of this process, and what does it mean for November's general election? Sam Nunn Berg was an advisor to Donald Trump during his first White House campaign, and he's with us from our studio in New York. Sam, welcome to Planet America.
It's great to be back on.
So in head-to-head polls, both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders tend to lead President Trump by at least 5 percentage points, Sam. Who do you think the president would rather face in November?
Well, I think certainly the president would much have preferred, and he said even last week that he would have preferred to face Bernie. He was ready for Bernie Sanders. He was ready to start calling him a communist, which he had already said in major national interviews. With that said, my friends and past colleagues at the campaign, I've spoken to them, and they're very prepared for Joe Biden. It's going to come down to Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin against Joe Biden. Those were very tight races for the president. He barely won them in 2016. However, I think that with the terms of their organization prowess, in terms of the way the campaign has been focused on those states, they've been building out their lists, they've been building out their digital and election outreach. The president should be trending to get to the path of re-election. And I would remind everyone, in America, typically presidents get re-elected. It's 14 out of the last 19.
Leaving aside the campaign for a second though, Sam, do you know what Trump really thinks about those two behind the scenes?
When I was working for the president, I spoke with him, and we're talking about a period of 2014 and 2015. So in 2014, what the president was most surprised about was that Barack Obama had made clear that he didn't want Joe Biden to run for president. Hillary Clinton was the candidate that he preferred, and then Mr. Trump had said, well, there must be something wrong with Biden. That's very interesting to him. In terms of Bernie Sanders, we had always looked at Bernie Sanders' popularity against Hillary Clinton in the 2015-2016 primary cycle as more of a symptom of the other side, meaning the Democrats looking for an outsider, novelty, exciting candidate, and Bernie Sanders essentially fit that bill. Because remember, Bernie Sanders only registers as a Democrat when he needs to run for president. Otherwise, he's an independent who caucuses and conferences with the Democrats in the Senate. Joe Biden is a challenging candidate for the president. Joe Biden appeals to working class union members. That's why he was put on the ticket by Barack Obama. He was put on the ticket to carry Pennsylvania for Obama in 2008, to carry Wisconsin, to carry Michigan, which Obama did in both elections. But this time, what you'll see President Trump arguing is that whatever Joe is going to promise you, I've done more for you, and Joe has a 25-plus year record in politics, and he never got it done. And you're going to hear a lot about trade. You're going to hear a lot about the issue of life abortion. You're going to hear a lot about judges. It's going to be a very contentious race. And then, of course, both of them will go after each other on the personal level.
So, Sam, when it comes to Joe Biden, we're already seeing online attacks from Sanders supporters questioning whether Biden has dementia and casting doubts over his mental acuity generally. Do you think that that is going to be a major attack line from President Trump if Biden is the nominee?
It's obvious to anyone that Joe Biden at 78 has some kind of decline. I don't want to say dementia. I'm not going to say, but he has some kind of decline. He's an older guy, and he's always been a guy that's been known to make rhetorical flourishes, let's say, or to make stupid mistakes. And obviously, these are just getting accentuated now at his older age. And the president will pick up on those. But you know what? Joe Biden, and I tell my friends working in the White House, and I tell my friends at the campaign, don't underestimate Biden. Those debates are going to be extremely fun to watch. They're going to be very historic. They're going to be like a cage match of two altacockers, as I like to say.
Sam Nunn Berg, good to talk to you again. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
So here was the delegate count heading into today's primaries. With 1,991 delegates needed to clinch the nomination, former Vice President Joe Biden was on 664, followed by Senator Bernie Sanders on 573, then Senator Elizabeth Warren way back on 64, Michael Bloomberg on 61, Pete Buttigieg on 26, Amy Klobuchar on 7, and Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard on 2. But of course, Warren, Bloomberg, Buttigieg and Klobuchar all suspended their campaigns last week. So what happens to those other delegates? Good question, and I wish there was a simple answer, but this is American politics and there are pretty much no simple answers. We've talked a bit about the 15% viability threshold for candidates. You need to get a minimum 15% in a congressional district within a particular state to win any delegates, and they are awarded more or less proportionally to candidates above 15%. But each state also has a second batch of delegates, referred to as at-large delegates. Sounds like somebody the FBI might be after, and who knows, they might be.
Suspect at large.
They are awarded to candidates who not only clear 15% in a district, but also win a minimum of 15% in the statewide popular vote. Not surprisingly, most of those statewide at-large delegates have gone to Biden and Sanders, but 49 of them were won by candidates who've since dropped out. The Democratic Party rules say if a presidential candidate is no longer a candidate when the statewide delegates are selected, the allocation shall be proportionately divided among those still in the race. So, at this stage, Biden and Sanders will get about half each. But what about those other delegates for dropouts? They are referred to as pledged delegates, and while they remain pledged to Warren, Bloomberg, Buttigieg or Klobuchar, they are effectively free agents when they get to the Democratic National Convention in July.
A day which will see the nomination of a presidential candidate for the Democratic Party.
The DNC rules simply say those pledged delegates shall in all good conscience reflect the sentiments of those who elected them. But that could mean they cast their vote for the dropout candidate, who they were pledged to on any and all ballots in Milwaukee.
Give me a break. That's a bunch of malarkey.
Or they could decide that because Bloomberg, Buttigieg and Klobuchar endorsed Joe Biden, they should switch their support to Joe Biden.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Or they could decide if Bernie won their state, they should vote for him.
We cast 49 votes for Senator Bernie Sanders.
So, along with the 771 automatic or super delegates we talked about last week, who can decide to support anybody they like, those pledged delegates for the dropouts could prove decisive in a closely contested nomination. So, come July, they really could be America's most wanted.
Big, beautiful world.
Hey, guess what Sunday was? It was International Women's Day! Yay! Woo! What better way to celebrate than by...
But I am suspending my campaign for president.
By saying goodbye to the last serious female contender for the presidency. And I said serious contender? Some commentators did not take this well.
I think there's a feeling that your campaign ending is very specific to you, and it also feels a little bit like a death knell in terms of the prospects of having a woman for president in our lifetimes.
Now look, I know it's infuriating that men seem to always hog the spotlight.
You've got that right.
But America went a long time without women even really competing for the presidency. And then finally in 2016 they had a front runner who was a woman, and then the very next election they had 3 women who were legitimate chances for the presidency. 4 if you're being generous, 5 if you're being really generous, and 6 if you're drunk. So things are changing, and it looks like they might be about to change even more. You see, genuine presidential prospects don't just fall out of the sky. Usually you need to be a governor or a senator first, and while the current percentage of governors that are women won't exactly have you jumping out of your seats, it's not quite as bad as it seems. You see, as recently as 1996, there was only 1 female governor, but the numbers have risen from there, and after a recent lull, they've begun to kick up a gear again. But even more than that, 4 of the 6 female candidates this cycle came from the Senate. And since the 1990s, the number of female senators has been steadily rising, especially in the last few years. This bump here is creating many more potential candidates who might last that little bit longer. Yes, I get it. She hasn't dropped out yet. But in California last week, Gabbard came 9th out of 5 people who were still competing, okay? So give it a rest. We can take this even further though and consider how someone becomes a senator or a governor. And that is, they tend to start off in state legislatures, which are almost 30% female after, once again, a recent bump. And 5 legislatures now have more than 40% women, including Nevada, which is majority female. So a few more of these bumps in state legislatures and then in the Senate and in governorships, and we might finally see a pipeline for candidates to be that first elusive female president. Geez, what is it with you and Gabbard? She's not going to win, okay?
Big, beautiful world.
Well, this week the world's financial markets crashed along with the oil price, all in a major sell-off triggered by the coronavirus. The Trump administration is considering a range of emergency economic measures, including a temporary payroll tax cut and federal aid for casual workers and industries hardest hit by the virus, including airlines, hotels and others. Meanwhile, at least 3 Republican members of Congress have self-isolated after coming into contact with an infected person at last week's Conservative CPAC conference in Maryland. Each of them came into contact with President Trump afterwards. One of those now in quarantine, Congressman Matt Gaetz. He made light of the risk of infection just last week by wearing a gas mask on the floor of the House of Representatives. He shared a ride on Air Force One with the President on Sunday. The White House says the President has not been tested for COVID-19 because he has not experienced any symptoms.
Then there was Trump's Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, who probably didn't showcase perfect containment technique at the conference. It may not be a coincidence, John, that almost immediately after that conference, Mulvaney was dispatched to literally the other side of the world.
Well, another in quarantine after CPAC is Trump's incoming Chief of Staff, replacing Mulvaney, that's Mark Meadows. And despite the number of public events that are now being cancelled across the United States, the President himself says he sees no reason to call off his campaign rallies.
We have tens of thousands of people standing outside the arena, so...
Isn't it a risk if there's that many people all close together?
It doesn't bother me at all, and it doesn't bother them at all.
Trump's showing a brave face, John, but I'm betting he'd be pretty worried right now. He had this nice little economy going. Just this week, we saw more jobs created over the past 3 months than for any other 3-month period in Trump's presidency. But then along came this virus. And now Goldman Sachs is projecting 0.9%, 0% and 1% GDP growth for the next 3 quarters. Not very good, especially seen as every percentage point less of election year GDP growth is associated with 2 to 3 points less of the president's vote share. So no wonder Trump means business. He even whacked on his action jacket. And the president's been dispensing pandemic levels of happy talk, like 2 weeks ago when he said how very much under control coronavirus is. But unfortunately, he then also said how the stock market was starting to look very good to him as well. That did not age well, and this aged even worse.
As of today, we have 15 cases of COVID-19.
When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero, that's a pretty good job we've done.
Close to 0 sick people, hey? Some things just can't be spun, like the shambolic testing regime used to assess the extent of the problem. Until last week, all samples had to be sent to the CDC for testing, and when I say sent, I mean shipped. And then for every test, a lengthy phone call was required as well. And even then, they only tested certain people. Until a week ago, showing all the symptoms of COVID-19 was not enough to get you tested. But at least according to Trump, all those testing issues are over.
Importantly, anybody right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're there. They have the tests. And the tests are beautiful.
Maybe, but when The Atlantic looked into how many people had actually been tested, they could only verify that 3,000 people had been tested as of 2 days ago, compared to South Korea, where they'd tested 66,000 people within a week of their first case. And at least according to the lab companies, they're expecting it to take 8 weeks before America's done all the testing it needs to catch up. So how many thousands of people with COVID-19 are currently walking around America infecting other people yet to be discovered? We just don't know. But on the other hand, Trump's got some more happy talk.
I have to say, people are now staying in the United States, spending their money in the U.S., and I like that. You know, I've been after that for a long time.
Great. Look, obviously Trump should stop people needlessly panicking, and it's not his fault that there's a worldwide virus, but there's calming people down, and then there's this.
You know, my uncle, he's a great person. He was at MIT. He taught at MIT for, I think, like a record number of years. He was a great super genius, Dr. John Trump. I like this stuff. I really get it. People are surprised that I understand it. Every one of these doctors said, how do you know so much about this? Maybe I have a natural ability. Maybe I should have done that instead of running for president.
What's better, a super genius or a stable genius?
Great question, John. Having said all that, someone must have been impressed by Trump's revelations there, because they've inspired an exciting new TV series.
Now, the virus that we're talking about having to do, you know, a lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat.
The Trump Doctor.
Very few things that are worthwhile in life come without a cost.
We're ordering a lot of different elements of medical.
You are smart and you're creative, but there are things you can't do. You can't do miracles, you can't fix the unfixable.
It's going to disappear. One day it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
He wants to believe things will work out. That's why he's a hero.
And the tests are all perfect. Like the letter was perfect. The transcription was perfect, right? This was not as perfect as that, but pretty good.
Sometimes the hero loses. There's nothing he can do to help.
I mean, view this the same as the flu. When somebody sneezes, I mean, I try and bail out as much as possible.
The Trump Doctor.
And on that note, we're right out of time, but we will be back on Friday night.
See you for a fireside chat on the news channel at 8 p.m. Bye-bye.